Wyoming Territory. 1883, the wind tore down from the Bighorn Mountains, sharp with dust and the scent of snow, and Catherine Hale stood outside the dry goods store in Sheridan, clutching her shawl tighter with one hand and her empty basket in the other. "I said no credit," the shopkeeper barked behind her, already turning his back. "Not again." She didn't argue, just nodded, quiet, and stepped off the wooden porch with her chin held high, even though her stomach ached from going without since yesterday, and her son hadn't had more than half a biscuit since dawn. The hem of her dress dragged against the packed dirt, and she blinked fast against the sting in her eyes. She would not cry, not in the middle of town. A few steps away, a man leaned against the post outside the livery, arms crossed, hat low over his eyes. His coat was worn but clean, boots scuffed from the trail, and there was a steady way about him like nothing in the world could shake him. He watched her without pretending otherwise. "You got turned away for food?" he asked, voice low and sure. Catherine stiffened, then gave a small nod, eyes flicking toward her wagon. "I will figure something out." The man pushed off the post and stepped closer. "Come with me," he said, simple as a handshake. "I'll fill your table tonight." She hesitated. Her hand tightened around the basket. "You do not even know me." "I do not need to," he said. "You got a child to feed, that is enough." Her gaze dropped to the dust between them. "I cannot take charity." "It is not charity," he said. "It is supper, come on." Catherine looked up at him then, really looked. He had kind eyes, a soft crease at the edge of his mouth like he had smiled once, a long time ago, and maybe forgot how. He was not young, but not old either, mid-30s maybe. There was something deeply settled in him that made her feel steadier just standing near. She nodded. He gave a small nod back, then turned and led her across the street to where his horse waited hitched beside a muddy buckboard wagon. "Name is Celas Whitlo," he said, lifting the reins. "You can ride up front or follow behind." "Catherine Hale," she said, climbing up. "My son is back at our place. It is just outside town by the creek." Celas flicked the reins. "Then that is where we will go." The ride was quiet but not heavy, the kind of silence that left room for breathing. The wagon creaked along the dirt road as the sun dipped lower, painting the hills gold. Catherine watched his hands on the reins, strong, weathered, steady. She had not been around a man like that in a long time. They turned off the road and followed the creek until her small homestead came into view. The cabin was old, roof patched with tar paper and hope. A boy stood on the porch, barefoot and thin, watching them approach. "That your boy?" Celas asked. "Yes, his name is Micah." "He is 7. Celas nodded once. "Look sharp." The wagon stopped and Catherine climbed down just as Micah ran to her. She caught him, lifting him into a hug. "We have a guest," she said softly. "He is going to help us tonight." Micah looked up at Celas with wide eyes. "You got food," Celas smiled. "I got more than that. You like rabbit stew?" Micah grinned. "I do." Celas unloaded his supplies: salt pork, beans, potatoes, flour, a good cut of venison wrapped in cloth. Catherine's breath caught at the sight of it all. She opened her mouth to say something, but Celas just looked at her and said, "Let's cook." The kitchen was small, but warm once the fire caught. Celas worked easily, chopping vegetables while Catherine mixed flour and water for biscuits. Micah sat at the table, eyes wide with the smell of meat roasting. "You cook like a ranch wife," Catherine said after watching him for a bit. "I was raised on a ranch," he said. "Ma died when I was 16. Learned what I had to." She nodded. "Your father?" "Gone before I can remember," he said, not looking up. "Any family now?" Celas shook his head. "Just me." Catherine stirred the stew. "Same here." They did not talk about what happened to her husband. She did not offer and he did not ask. It was enough that she stood tall and her boy was alive. That was story enough. Dinner filled the small cabin with warmth and laughter Micah had not made in weeks. Afterward, Celas helped clear the table, then stepped outside while Catherine tucked her son into bed. When she came back out, he was leaning against the porch rail looking up at the stars. "Thank you," she said quietly. He looked over at her. "Anytime. You did not have to do this." "I wanted to." She stepped closer. "You are kind." He shrugged. "I do not know about that." "You are," she said. Her voice was soft but sure now. "It has been a long time since someone showed us kindness." He looked at her, eyes catching the moonlight. "It does not have to be the last time," Catherine swallowed. Her heart beat faster, not out of fear, but something she had not felt in years' hope. "You mean that?" "I do." They stood there, porch boards creaking under their boots, the night quiet around them but for the wind in the trees. "Will you come back tomorrow?" she asked. "I will," he said without hesitation. She smiled then, real and full. "Good." Celas tipped his hat. "Good night, Catherine." "Good night, Celas." He walked down the path and climbed into his wagon, the wheels creaking as he turned back toward town. But he looked back once, just before the bend, and saw her still standing there, watching him go, waiting for him to return. The next morning brought frost on the window panes and a sky streaked with pale rose. Catherine moved quietly through the cabin, laying another log on the fire and setting oats to boil. Micah stirred but didn't wake. She wrapped her shawl close and stepped onto the porch, the cold biting but not unkind. A single set of hoofprints tracked up the lane. She studied them without touching them, the way a person might study a letter they didn't dare open. She didn't know what to expect, only that she hoped for it more than she dared say aloud. By mid-morning, she heard hooves again, slower this time, deliberate against the frozen ground. She wiped her hands on her apron, heart steady but full. Celas rode in without hurry. His coat was buttoned high, collar turned up against the wind. He dismounted and tied the reins to the post, his eyes meeting hers like a question already answered. "You find your way all right?" she asked, brushing her palms together. "I did," he said. "Roads rougher past the creek, but the horse didn't mind." She stepped aside from the door. "Come in if you're not in a rush." "Not in any particular one," he said, and followed her inside, removing his hat and setting it gently near the hearth. Micah, now awake, watched him from his corner with cautious interest. "You remember Mr. Whitlo?" Catherine asked. "Yes, ma'am," Micah said, sitting up straighter. Celas gave a slow nod. "Morning, son. You help your mama with the chores." Micah looked to Catherine, then back. "I carry wood, feed the hens too." "That's good work," Celas said, voice easy, not patronizing. "Cabin this size doesn't run by itself." Catherine poured hot water into a basin. "There's fence down out back. A deer got through last week." "I can take a look if you've got spare wire," Celas offered, slipping off his coat. "I've some rolled under the lean-to," she said, surprised at how natural it felt, him standing there like he belonged. He glanced toward the window. "I'll get started before the ground softens. Wind's got a sharp edge this morning." While he worked, Catherine brought out her sewing basket. The boys' shirts were wearing thin at the elbows, and she had no fabric to waste. She stitched while keeping half an eye on the yard, watching Celas move along the broken fence line with quiet focus. He didn't talk to himself like some men did when working alone. He just moved with purpose, like every task mattered. By midday, the fence stood straight again. Celas came in with dirt on his boots and a scrape on his forearm that he didn't mention. Catherine handed him a tin plate with last night's biscuits and slices of ham she'd kept wrapped. He sat near the fire, stretching his legs. "You've got a good piece of land here. Water runs clear, trees for shelter." "It was my husband's," she said, threading her needle again. We came from Kansas 5 years back. He put up the beams himself. Celas didn't speak for a moment. He passed here, she nodded once. 2 winters ago, fever took him fast. Micah had gone outside to check the hen house. The quiet between them stretched, not uncomfortable but full. Celas turned his plate in his hands. I buried my mother near Laramie. She liked the wind there. Said it kept her honest. Catherine looked over at him. You stayed long, few years. Took work where I could. Drove cattle north, helped build the rail grade. Never stayed long anywhere after that. You planning to stay now? He met her eyes. There a reason I shouldn't, she set her sewing down. No reason I can think of. He stood, brushing his hands clean. I'll ride into town. Bring back nails and salt if you're low. Anything else? She hesitated, then said, window glass if you can find any. That back pane near the stove has a crack coming through. Celas nodded. I'll keep an eye. She walked him out to his horse. The wind had picked up, sharp enough to tug at her shawl. He mounted, adjusting his saddle without haste. I'll be back before dusk, he said. You don't owe us anything, she said, voice quiet but steady. I know, he said. That's not the reason I'm coming back. She reached up without thinking, brushing a bit of dust from the collar of his coat. Then I'll be here. He tipped his head once, then turned his horse toward the path, not looking back this time. But she watched until he disappeared beyond the bend, the place where the creek dipped low and the trees crowded near. Inside, the cabin held the scent of ham and wood smoke. Micah came in with a feather in his hand, grinning. I think he likes it here, the boy said. Catherine smiled, running her thumb along the edge of her thread. I think he might. The wagon wheels cracked through thin ice along the ruts, and Celas returned by late afternoon, his coat dusted with road salt and his cheeks raw from wind. Catherine stepped away from the chicken coop when she heard the horse, wiping her hands on her skirt, her breath clouding in the air. He lifted a small crate from the back of the wagon, the wood damp but solid. Found the glass, he said. Traded a pair of stirrups for it. Fellow at the Smiths owed me for a saddle cinch I fixed last year. She held the crate as he handed it down. I'll keep it wrapped till spring. No point fixing panes till the ground thaws. I brought a roll of oilcloth too, he said. Might keep the cold from creeping in till then. Micah opened the door from inside, his hair sticking up unevenly. I finished the kindling. There's a lot this time. Celas gave a short nod. You haul it yourself, dragged it in a sack, the boy said. It kept snagging on the door. Next time, twist the top and tie it off, Celas said. Stops it catching. Micah blinked, nodded, then disappeared back inside. Catherine stepped up onto the porch beside him. You teach children much, not often, he said. But I remember what I was like at that age. Would have listened better if someone had spoken plain. She leaned her shoulder lightly against the doorframe. You speak plain. Celas looked at her then, eyes steady beneath the brim of his hat. Only way I know. The wind caught a coil of her hair and brushed it against her cheek. She tucked it back, not looking away. You work with leather, she asked. I do when it's needed. Used to ride dispatch for the stage line down near Rawlins. Saddle straps wore fast. Had to mend what I couldn't replace. She motioned toward the lean-to. There's an old harness back there. Been cracked since before the fall. If you've got time, I'd trade a jar of plum preserves for the work. I'll look at it after supper, he said. Preserves or no. Catherine stepped back and let the door swing open behind her. You'll eat with us again. He set his hat on the hook beside the door without answering. The stew that night was thinner, stretched with turnip and a bit of barley, but Micah ate 3 bowls without stopping, and Celas didn't leave a scrap behind. After the dishes were stacked, Catherine laid out her mending in front of the hearth, and Celas sat nearby with the harness stretched across his knees. The silence was different now, not the hush of strangers. but the comfort of people who had begun to belong in the same space. "You ever think of settling somewhere for good?" she asked, threading her needle through a torn seam. "I did once," he replied, "north of Cheyenne. But the man who owned the land ran short on gold and long on promises. Sold the place out from under me." She nodded but didn't comment. Trust, she'd learned, was built in the space between words. "The land here's held in Micah's name," she said after a while. "No bank can touch it." Celas glanced up. "Smart. Wasn't my doing," she added. "His father had sense about some things. He didn't ask more. Just leaned forward, cutting a new strap with his pocket knife." The hearth crackled and popped, and the wind outside began to rise. "You sleep in town?" she asked. "Room above the livery," he said. "It's dry mostly. Boards creak something awful." "You're welcome to the cot in the corner if the drive back's too long," she said, eyes still on her sewing. "I'd not want to impose." "You wouldn't be." A quiet passed, filled only by the sound of the knife slicing through leather. "I'd stay then," he said at last. She folded the shirt and set it aside. "There are extra blankets in the trunk." He stood to test the leather strap's give. "I'll fix the buckle tomorrow," she nodded. "That'd be good." Micah, already asleep, stirred under his quilt. The night had turned cold, wind pressing against the cabin walls like breath. Celas laid the harness carefully on the table and moved toward the cot. Catherine rose to bank the fire, her hands steady, her shoulders no longer braced against the weight of everything. Before she turned in, she paused beside him. "I trust you," she said, voice low but certain. His eyes met hers. "You've got reason to." She nodded, then reached out and touched his hand just once before stepping away. The wind howled against the eaves, but inside the little cabin it was warm. By the end of the week, the harness was repaired, the oilcloth nailed tight over the cracked pane, and Celas had made a habit of arriving just after sunrise. He never knocked. Catherine knew his boots by their weight on the porch, the way they paused at the door like he was waiting for the day to tell him whether he was welcome. She always opened it before he had to wonder. On Friday, the snow came heavy and wet, trailing down from the northern sky without hurry. Catherine watched it from the back stoop, her shawl wrapped close, a tin basin cooling at her feet. Celas came around the side of the cabin, his coat soaked down the shoulders, a bundle of chopped kindling in his arms. "You'll catch chill," she said. He set the wood down and looked out past the fence line. "I've had worse from a mountain spring. This is soft weather." She picked up the basin and straightened. "You speak like you've known a lot of places." He brushed snow from his sleeves. "Enough to know the wind sounds different in everyone." They went inside together. Micah was building a tower of wooden spools near the hearth, his fingers red from the cold. Catherine set the basin down and reached for another log. Celas crouched beside the boy. "You ever seen a snowshoe rabbit?" Micah shook his head without looking up. "They turn white when the snow sticks," Celas said. "Makes them hard to spot unless you know where they rest." Micah glanced sideways. "You ever catch one once? Took nearly an hour just to track." "They're smart." Catherine stirred the pot on the stove. "You think we'll be snowed in?" "Could be," Celas said. "Drifts are rising fast in the low ground." She met his eyes across the room. "You planning to ride out in it?" He stood slowly. "I was going to." "There's no need," she said. "You can stay." He didn't answer right away. The room was warm, but the quiet turned close. "You sure?" he asked. "I wouldn't have said it if I wasn't." He nodded once. That night they ate by lamplight. The stew wasn't much, but Catherine had found dried sage tucked at the back of the cupboard, and it gave the broth something new. After Micah went to sleep, Celas stayed by the fire, his legs stretched long, hands folded loose in his lap. Catherine folded laundry nearby, her fingers moving slow over a worn pair of trousers. She didn't look at him when she spoke. You ever think about what comes next? Celas shifted slightly. Not in the way most folks do. What way then? I don't make plans past the next sunrise. Keeps the ground steadier under me. She folded another shirt. You ever want something steadier than that? He leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. I might, if it came quiet and certain, if it didn't ask for more than I had to give. She turned toward him. Do you think you found that here? He didn't answer at once. The fire cracked and outside the snow whispered against the windows. I think I've found something, he said. Still learning the shape of it. She walked over and sat across from him, close enough to feel the warmth off his shoulders. There's room here, she said, for someone who works hard and keeps his word. His eyes met hers. And for someone who's made mistakes, we all have, she said. It's what we do after that counts. He reached out then, slowly, and touched her hand. Just the edge of his fingers against hers, like someone easing a door open without forcing it. She didn't pull away. The firelight made their shadows long across the floor. Snow kept falling outside, thick and certain, burying the road to town. But inside the cabin, the quiet wasn't empty anymore. It was waiting. The storm held for 2 more days. Snow drifted high along the fence posts and buried the wagon wheels. The wind quieted by Sunday, leaving the land blanketed in a hush so deep it felt like the world had been reset. Inside the cabin, Catherine kneaded bread dough on the table, her sleeves rolled to the elbow, flour softening the lines of her hands. Celas split logs near the hearth, stacking them neatly beside the stove. The room was warm, the kind of warmth that came from steady hands and shared work. Micah sat cross-legged near the fire, carving a stick Celas had helped him whittle clean the day before. He worked with careful focus, his brow furrowed in concentration. You always this quiet when the weather lets up? Celas asked, brushing wood dust from his palms. Catherine glanced up from the dough. I listen better when the world stops shouting. He leaned a shoulder against the wall. Then you've been listening a long time. She shaped the dough into 2 small loaves without speaking. After a moment, she said, You ever think about building something again? Not a place, a life. He crossed the room slowly, his steps soundless over the worn boards. I've thought about it more in the last few days than I have in years. She set the loaves aside to rise and wiped her hands clean. What stopped you before? He looked at the window, where frost curled like lace along the corners of the glass. I never found a place that felt worth staying for. Micah stood from the hearth and held up the carved stick. It's a bird now. Celas took it, turning it gently in his fingers. You gave it wings. You did that right. Catherine watched them, heart heavy in a way that wasn't sorrow anymore, just full. He's taken to you. Celas met her eyes. I've never had cause to stay in one place, but I see reason now. More than one. She stepped toward him, close enough to smell the cedar smoke clinging to his shirt. There's room here, not just in the cabin. He reached for her hand, not hurried, not uncertain. I'd like to stay, not for the night. For good. Micah looked up between them, then back down at his carving without saying a word. Catherine watched him a moment, then said, He's old enough to remember what it means when someone leaves. I won't promise him anything that won't be kept. Celas tightened his hand around hers. Then I promise him this, I'll be here. I'll work this land and shape a life with you both. No roads ever looked better than this one. Catherine felt tears rise, but she didn't hide them. Then stay, she said. Stay and be part of this. He pulled her gently into his arms, and she leaned into him without hesitation, her face against his shoulder, the flour still dusting her hair. Outside, the snow brightened under a cold sun, and the wind had quieted to nothing more than breath. That spring, Celas built a new chicken coop with Micah, teaching him how to square corners and test a beam's strength by feel. He mended fence posts, planted corn with Catherine in long rows, and added a second-hand carved rocking chair beside the hearth. They married in June, beneath the cottonwoods near the creek. The preacher rode out from town, and Catherine wore her mother's brooch pinned at her collar. Micah stood beside Celas, holding the ring crafted from a silver coin Celas had carried since his trail days. Afterward, they shared a meal at a table built by Celas's own hands, with bread Catherine had baked and jam Micah helped preserve. There was no music, but they danced anyway, barefoot in the dirt, laughing under the open sky. By the next winter, the cabin had a new roof, and the pantry shelves were lined with jars and sacks stacked neat. Micah had grown taller, his cheeks full and his voice stronger. He called Celas Pa without prompting. Sometimes at night, Celas would sit with Catherine on the porch, her hand tucked into his, both of them watching the land settle into sleep. He didn't speak much, but he didn't need to. She understood him now the way one understands the grain of wood beneath the hand, or how the wind carries stories if you wait long enough to hear them. And when he turned his head to press a kiss to her temple, she closed her eyes and leaned into him, knowing this wasn't the end of anything. It was the beginning of all the rest.